How do we raise our game when it comes to meeting deadlines without losing any of our creativity or sanity? Today, I'm talking with my friend Phil Cooke about the power of ideas on a deadline. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today I welcome back my friend Phil Cooke. Phil's been on the show a few times. Phil and I do an event together each year called the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And Phil has a new book out, brand new. It's called Ideas on a Deadline that we're going to talk about today. And there's no deadline quite like Sunday. Sunday is always headed down the track right at us. So how do we execute high-quality ideas quickly? How do we work within deadlines? We're going to talk about how budgets and deadlines can actually fuel our creativity. All that, plus a game of 5 questions with Phil. It's all coming up right after this.
Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and I want to tell you why you need to buy my new book, Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. Let me tell you something. We live in a creative economy. Today, creativity is the currency of this generation. You may be a filmmaker, a writer, a designer, a musician, but you also may be a coach, a teacher, an insurance salesman, whatever you do. Let me tell you something. We all have to deliver great ideas under the clock. This is your key to understanding how to open yourself up to having brilliant ideas when you need them the most. I've put in my experience, 30 to 40 years of living in this creative world that I live in, experiences and techniques from other high-level creative people. I've also included research, everything from dreams to walking, physical stuff, everything you could possibly think of, I've included in this book because I want you to understand the keys to opening yourself up to having brilliant ideas when you need them the most. You know, we often live under this myth that creative ideas will happen, but we have to wait. We have to wait till the muse hits, the fire falls from heaven. We have to wait for that Eureka Moment. Let me tell you, there's ways you can make that Eureka Moment happen when you need it. I think artist Chuck Close said it best. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. This book is going to teach you how to show up, get to work, how to be productive, how to have creative ideas when you need them the most. I'll tell you, you need to get your hands on this book. Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. I'm going to tell you, it could be a turn in your creative career. This could change the direction of your creative future. Get your hands on this book today.
Hey guys, today I welcome my friend, media producer, consultant, author, Phil Cooke. Phil, welcome back, man. It's been a while.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here. I remember the last time we talked, it was a lot of fun. And so I'm looking forward to today. I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. So you have a brand new book out called Ideas on a Deadline. So tell me a little bit about how the book came about for you.
Well, it's really interesting. I've spent my whole life writing and creating and producing under pressure, and I've produced a couple Super Bowl commercials, and I discovered the Super Bowl won't delay the broadcast won't delay the game because I didn't come up with a good idea for commercial. Right. And television scripts are the same way. You have
Hang on, I'm still rendering. Hang on 1 second. I'm still rendering.
No problem.
No, I'm just kidding. You're on your video. I'm talking about the Super Bowl is going to wait for you to finish rendering.
Yeah. Well, rendering is a problem of its own. Let me tell you that. But no, I've just discovered that I've always had to deliver under deadlines, and I actually love them because deadlines give me kind of a roadmap. I've talked to airline pilots who said, when I see the end of the runway racing forward, that's when my blood starts pumping and I get really excited. It's kind of the same way with a deadline. And so I don't really even start a project until I see the deadline looming in the distance, because suddenly that gets the blood flowing and gets your brain moving and ideas start popping. So I just am a big believer, but I run into people all the time that hate deadlines, can't operate because of their fear of deadlines. So I thought, you know what? It's not about the Eureka Moment. It's not about this concept that ideas fall from heaven. It's about what it takes for you to do to have ideas when you need them. And I mean great ideas, breakthrough ideas. So that's really the genesis of how and why I wrote the book.
So how do we raise our game when it comes to meeting deadlines, but not lose any of our creativity, our juices, or our sanity?
That's well, there's a number of things, but start with recognizing the importance of a deadline. One thing I've discovered in my career is that when you don't meet deadlines or you can't meet deadlines, the client, the boss, whoever you're working for loses an enormous amount of respect for you. I mean, because it basically says your deadline means nothing to me. It means your schedule means nothing to me. It means I don't have to deliver for you. And that's just not a level of respect a client or a boss wants to have from his team. So I think, first of all, understand that we need to embrace deadlines. Don't be afraid of them. They can, like I say, they're a roadmap. They can tell you when things are due. I'm an independent producer, so I have 6 or 8 different projects going at any given time. And those deadlines for the different projects are really what helps me schedule. So when you learn to embrace and respect a deadline, that really starts to change everything. And you see creativity through a new lens.
So how does that work in the movie business? And then let's relate it to church world. So obviously in the movie business, directors are known for either meeting their deadlines and be on budget, Clint Eastwood, or not, and racking up money over and over. So how does that bring that into church world some?
Yeah, and that's a great point. In the book, I mentioned the fact that the top directors, Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg, they operate on deadlines with budgets, and it's almost kind of a maxim here in Hollywood that every time you give a director a movie project with no budget and no deadline, it's a failure. It just doesn't work. There's just something about having a deadline, being able to stick to a budget, having kind of a fence around the project that gives you a sense of your bearings. It gives you a sense of perspective, and it really forces you to deliver well. And I think you're exactly right. Clint Eastwood is a great example. He's a guy, I on my podcast, I interviewed Todd Komarnicki, who wrote the great movie Sully for Clint Eastwood. And he said the interesting thing about Clint was he never changed a word of the script. He brought it in on time. He brought it in under budget. He said the thing he remembers most from that project is Clint was a consummate professional. And that's the attitude you want clients to have about you. You want your boss to have that attitude about you, being a consummate professional. And it comes with the discipline of deadlines.
So how do we balance that, spending loads of time on creating with also having to deliver? Obviously, as an entrepreneur myself, if I don't deliver, I'm out of business. It's done. That's right. Like I've got to deliver. And so how do we come up with lots of ideas? And then how do we translate that urgency to our team? You follow where I'm going?
Totally. And it's interesting that someone once said that to have great ideas, you need to have lots of ideas. I find people in Hollywood that are pitching one movie or one idea or one concept over and for years. Guess what? They rarely make it out here. The ones that make it and are most successful have got a whole portfolio of projects and ideas and concepts. Great idea people are always thinking of ideas. You need to always be priming the pump. So that's important. And the key to doing that, Carl, is the ability to say no. So often we as creative people, this, we're nice people. Creative people are nice. We're just easy to get along with. We're great team people. And we often will say yes to all kinds of stuff. We just have a great heart. But the truth is, I've discovered in my career that in order to do great things, you have to say no to even good things. You have to say no to things that are not going to help you get to where your calling, your career, your focus, your goals are. And so we have to learn. And in the book, it's interesting. In the book, I talk about nice ways of saying no. You don't have to be a jerk. I'm a big believer that you can say no without being a jerk. But the truth is, if I called up Steven Spielberg's office right now, he would never take the call. There's no way. And there's just no way. So all of us are, it's not a hierarchy thing. It's not a better or worse thing. It's just the fact that there's a lot of things that we're presented, we're offered, we have the opportunity to engage with, that if we really want to spend focused creative time and accomplish something significant, we need to say no to many of those things. Warren Buffett, the investor, has one of my favorite quotes. He said, the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no most of the time. I totally agree. You can do it in a nice way. And if you can do that, it opens up the margins, what we call the margins. It opens up time for you to really focus on creativity.
While you're there, give me some ways to say no politely.
Well, first of all, I like to say, let me check my schedule. That gives you some breathing room. Let me check my schedule. I say that a lot. And that gives me time to go back to the office, check the schedule. And many times they'll find a solution during that break, when you're not responding to them. They'll find another alternative. That's good. And that kind of reminds people, by the way, that you have a schedule too. You have things that you want to do. Another good way to do it is say, I'd love to do that, but I'm in the middle of a project of my own. I have a deadline looming that I have to reach. Everybody needs to know that you have priorities. You have projects as well. That's so important. One of the things I've learned is simply shut the door. Now that we're going back to the office after COVID, one of the problems I'm seeing is that people leave their door open and other people on the team just walk in, plop down on the sofa and just want to chat about stuff. And some of the studies I've read indicated that when you're interrupted, when you're in a really focused mode, whether you're designing or writing or editing or whatever you're doing, when somebody interrupts you like that, it takes between 20 and 40 minutes to get back to that same level of focus you were at before the interruption, which means how many of those can you handle in a day before your whole day is completely blown? Mm-hmm. So be careful about protecting your time. Shut the door. Don't be afraid to even put a sign out there. My assistant years ago found a sign that hung on my office door that says, "Nobody bothers the wizard. Nobody, nowhere, no how." The quote from The Wizard of Oz. And we put that up when I'm in the middle of writing a script or have a deadline to deliver. So there's fun, gracious ways of doing it, but protecting your time is really important.
Is the Christian way of saying that I need to pray about it? Let me pray about that.
That's become such a cliche, but hey, whatever works.
There you go. All right, let's jump back to, you talked about having lots of ideas. I was listening, I was driving today for about 4 or 5 hours. So I was listening to an SNL podcast, Dana Carvey and David Spade. They have a new podcast. And they had Dennis Miller on. And they were asking him about when he was on Weekend Update on SNL. We're throwing it way back now. But they were asking him, how were you so good at Weekend Update? And he said that exact same thing. Well, I had 100 jokes. I would just have a massive list of jokes, knowing that 20% of them might work, and then 10 of them I'm really going to hone. And so how does that work with ideas that it takes a lot to get to the great?
Those are actually good numbers. I often will say out of 10 ideas that I have, I'll discover that 7 just really stink right off the bat. A couple could be viable and might work, and 1 could be that breakthrough idea I'm looking for. So you just have to get into a mindset of being really brutal about your own ideas. I know people that, they spout off every idea that pops into their heads. That's why I hate being a part of brainstorming sessions, because there's always that guy in the room that feels like everything that pops into his brain, he's got to blurt it out to the room. But I think that we have to be much more critical of our own ideas. That doesn't mean, that we don't want to cut off our ideas too soon. I'm a big believer that, something that sounds crazy right now may be the perfect solution a day or two later. So be careful about that. But at the same time, understand, okay, that could be a good idea. Let me park it over here and see what else we could come up with. And so I'm just constantly thinking of all alternative ways. Look at it from, in the front, look at it come in from the back way, from the side door. Look at it from a lot of different perspectives, and hopefully you'll generate a lot of possibilities. And by the way, let me say this, Carl, don't let budget be a hamper to you early on. Right. I just really believe that 2 questions that we should stop asking are, how much will it cost and when can it be delivered? I think when we start creating and we think of those 2 questions too soon, we start eliminating ideas that could be amazing, but we're so obsessed by when can we deliver it and how much will it cost that we just start eliminating things right off the bat. There are ways around that. So don't be too quick to cut off ideas, but at the same time, always think about big ideas and think about how many you can collect. Don't put so much stock in 1 or 2 of your ideas that you sacrifice everything else for it. You just never know what'll work.
I agree with you. I think we've talked about this before, that one area that I've learned is to not be afraid to throw out bad ideas or ideas in general, knowing that. And I'll even caveat, use a caveat like, I'm just going to throw this out. We could kill it.
Yes.
Or let me just throw this at the wall. And if it sticks, great. If it doesn't, no problem. Something like that to let the team know. just start throwing. And knowing that my crazy idea, or it's okay to throw anything at the wall, because that crazy idea might lead to the not so crazy, might lead to down the line to the great. Do you agree?
You're exactly right. And one thing I would say about brainstorming is make sure people do prep work before they show up. Very often we have brainstorming sessions and we kind of surprise everybody with, okay, here's the question we need to answer, or here's the problem we need to solve. And the problem with that is they've had no prep time to think about it, and they're just blurting stuff off the top of their head. Give them time to think. There's a lot of research out there that says the quality of ideas is better with a single person coming up with it than they are when there's a team coming up with it. Now, granted, there are writers' rooms. I mean, if you go to Netflix or Warner Brothers or any TV studio or film studio here in Hollywood, there's very often writing teams, particularly that work on a series of programs. So writing teams could be good, but they're also extremely professional writers individually. These are really top-notch people. Right. So understand that, be thinking about the idea, germinating it, playing around with it. So when you walk into that brainstorming session, you're already sharing something that you put a lot of thought into, and it's not going to be something just, off the top of your head.
Right. It's formed well. All right. You talked earlier about the importance of meeting a deadline.
Yeah.
Let's talk about when you are going to be late, when it's maybe unavoidable, or when you're not going to hit it. What should I do in that scenario?
I learned early on. I had a video editor years ago that he would just be so afraid to tell me he couldn't make the deadline. He would wait till the very last minute. I mean, literally a day or maybe hours before the deadline to let me know he couldn't make it. And the problem with that is it puts me in a super bad way, because I don't have time to come up with an alternative. I don't have time to come up with another route or editor. And so I think, first of all, let people know as soon as possible that there's a big chance you may not be able to make this deadline. And the fact is, there are all kinds of reasons, real reasons. Sometimes we get sick. Sometimes circumstances change. Sometimes the client requests change. And so it's always good to be upfront early on when you can't make the deadline, because that allows the director, the producer, the project manager, whoever, gives them a chance to come up with an alternative way to make it happen. Because very often, even though you may have a reason you can't meet the deadline won't change. So we still have to come up with an alternative plan. So early on, let people know that you're not going to make it. And I would also say, this is true about any, one of the things I'm big on with my team here at Cooke Media Group is, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a proposed solution.
Right.
I don't want a team that just sits around coming up, moaning and groaning about problems. I want a team that's focused on solutions. So I'm happy for you to come up with why this won't work, or why we can't deliver here, or why we won't make this deadline. But at the same time, I want your suggestion and recommendation, well thought, by the way, of how we're going to make it happen. So come up with a plan, come up with an alternative, and be there to try to help the team if you know you can't make it. Just start it early enough so they can plan.
Talk to me about the Eureka moment. What is really happening when the light bulb goes off?
Well, we have this myth out there that, in creativity, there's this, glorious moment when the angelic choir starts singing and the idea gods just drop brilliant, there you go, brilliant creative ideas right on our head. If you're a watercolorist, if you're writing your own book and you don't care about publication or deadlines, you can sit on your back porch and just wait till the muse hits or those creative moments happen. But if you're like, guys like you or me, and we have deadlines to hit, we just can't wait. Now, what I discovered about the Eureka Moment is, it's not really a Eureka Moment. It's not just suddenly, boom, the idea hits you. It's the result of a lot of preparation leading up to that moment. And what often happens is, we think about a project, we work on a project, we kick it around, we play with it, we discuss it with the team. And sometimes we go to bed, sometimes we take a walk, sometimes we just relax. And our subconscious mind starts making connections that we never dreamed about before. And suddenly it all comes together out of what seems out of the blue at the moment, but it's really not. It's really the culmination of a lot of preparation and a lot of steps that you've taken leading up to that moment. So I say that to say, don't believe that you don't have to work on the project. Don't believe that you don't have to do your research. Don't believe that you don't have to think about it and it'll just suddenly hit you. You have to do all that hard work ahead of time for that Eureka moment to happen. And it's funny, one of the things I've learned here in Hollywood is the best writers, the best producers, directors, the best creative people here in Hollywood they just happen to coincidentally have a lot of creative eureka moments. And it's because they're willing to put in that hard work up front. And that's when the ideas really start to flow.
And I think that's so true. I'm a video guy, motion designer, and I'll fight with a video for, a couple hours, however long it is, and cuss and scream at the computer screen, and then walk off to use the restroom, to go take a walk, go get something, a drink, even, just walk somewhere else. And in that moment of opening the fridge, I got it. And it's because I've wrestled with it for a couple of hours to know, okay, that's not going to work. That's not,
that's really
wrestling
true.
with it. Yeah.
Really true. That's good.
All right. So let's talk about some of the greatest fears of creative people, especially in ministry. Sometimes one of them being comparison, the comparison trap.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that some.
I think comparison is just the worst thing you could possibly do so often. And it's a natural thing, but it's a destructive thing. Very often we compare ourselves to other people when we don't really know the circumstances they were under, or maybe the privileges they had, or the head start they may have had, or the better tools they may have, or the team around them they may have. We don't really understand the difference between me and that guy, but I'm always comparing myself to that guy. And you know what? There's a lot of philosophy that says stop comparing to other people and start comparing to yourself. Compete with your own self, because that's what's really, really important. And yet it's such a natural thing. We look on Instagram at what other people are doing. We look at, guys like you and I who are video, TV, film guys. We look at Vimeo and see what other short films people are making and think, why am I not doing that well? What's the matter with me? And I read books, and, I go to Barnes and Noble and I see bestsellers, and I think that's not as good as my book. I can do better than that. And it doesn't help. It doesn't start a creative, positive cycle. It just starts a kind of a spiral to the negative. And so I just think stop, fight it. Stop comparison, because you really don't know what they're going through, what they're experiencing, the team they may have at their disposal. I learned a long time ago that, you know what? I may have a message for a small group of people. So I'm going to really go after that group with all I have. When it comes to social media, I don't care about having a lot of followers. I want to have the right followers, because those followers will feed me. They'll help me engage with them better. We'll accelerate our career and our choices when it comes to our calling. I just think that we need to focus more on our own self and what we're called to do, rather than compare to other people, because that just doesn't really help.
You bring up such a good point, especially in church world. People look at, the question pastors usually ask when they meet each other is, how many you running? How many's in your, how big's your congregation? How many are on your live stream church online experience? That's like the first question that pastors ask each other.
Well, my wife is on the national board of the Salvation Army, and they have thousands of churches all over the world. But the Salvation Army intentionally puts their churches in really difficult places, urban areas that are tough, remote areas, rural areas that are tough. They're there to really minister to people. So you're never going to get Salvation Army churches that blow up to mega churches. It's just not going to happen because of where they are. And so I come in and speak a lot to their pastors, because I just really want to encourage them that the work they're doing, they may have 20 people in their congregation. They may have 50 people in their congregation, but the work they're doing is so critical and so important. So I just extrapolate that to everybody out there. If you're listening and you're a pastor, or a church or ministry leader, I love mega churches. I work with a lot of mega churches, and I'm grateful for the work and the impact they're making. However, there are churches in very difficult places, in small places, doing very, very challenging work. And that really matters ultimately at all. God didn't call us to be big. He didn't call us to, grow beyond our limits. He called us to be faithful in whatever circumstance that is. And that's what I really encourage people to consider.
Good. You talk in the book about confident people, those secure in their abilities or career, have the confidence to ask for help when they don't know something. So as a result, they find the answers, and then they move above or right ahead of everybody else, because they're not afraid to admit, I don't know. Talk that out some.
You and I probably have a lot in common there. When we were young in our career, It was embarrassing to ask for help. It was embarrassing to ask those difficult questions in the meeting with the boss. When we were with the boss, maybe of a pastor or an executive or a client, and we just didn't want to look stupid. And so down the road, I've had situations where I delivered the wrong project. I literally didn't even come close to nailing the target because I wasn't asking the right questions early enough. And it was just embarrassment. It was insecurity. And since that time, I've just learned I'd rather be embarrassed at the beginning by asking a few awkward questions than embarrassed at the end by completely missing the target, missing the goal. So I just think confidence, I can't overemphasize it. Now, granted, I work in Hollywood with a lot of very overconfident people. And, we can certainly be overconfident. I know a lot of people that their actual abilities aren't close to what they would say, how they would describe themselves. But at the same time, I also meet a lot of people riddled with insecurity. Now, the irony of this is very often the people that come off as overconfident are actually the people that are the most insecure because they're trying so hard to show you that they're in control, that they know what they're doing, that they really become overbearing. And so I'll tell you, insecurity is in the media world. And I have to say that having worked in Hollywood, having worked in the church world, the church is riddled with insecurity. In my career, I've just seen just amazing cases of people who, we're made in God's image. We should be the most confident, secure people on the planet. And yet very often the church is really ridiculed with is filled with insecurity. And so I just would encourage people, get a realistic assessment of your ability, your talents, your gifts, your calling. Constantly be evaluating yourself and constantly be evaluating the work you're doing, because insecurity it just really can destroy enormous creative talent. And I think that's one of the worst things that could happen when I see creative people out there.
One thing I've learned from other leaders, Michael Hyatt and folks like that come to mind, is the power of the simple. It is asking the simple questions, whatever that might be, or explaining things in a very simple way. That if you sound if it's complicated, most of the team won't get it. Asking the simple questions and then explaining things in a simpler way.
It's funny you say that. I saw a post on social media this morning that said, if you can't explain the gospel to a child, you're not going to be able to explain it to an adult. Right. And boy, that really made a lot of sense to me. That simplicity. And in advertising and promotion, I work a lot in advertising and marketing. Being able to get a message across without a lot of fluff is a real art form.
I agree. And I think that's definitely true in the advertising world. You almost pay a lot of money and have a lot of brilliant minds to get down to the simple. Just do it.
Yes.
Do the do, or, Matt.
Well, just do it. Just do it. Think about that. So many catchphrases and taglines out there are 1, 2, 3 words.
Right.
That's really remarkable. And yet they're so powerful.
Do we become less creative as we get older?
Absolutely not. Let me just put that myth to put it to bed. The truth is, research indicates that we do not. Now, our creativity changes. The way we attack a problem changes. The way we look at problems change. But that doesn't mean we get less creative as we get older. I can name you, in fact, in the book, I talk about numerous artists and creative people, filmmakers that were incredibly productive into their 80s and even 90s.
Clint Eastwood is still, 91? Clint Eastwood?
Yeah.
Still making movies.
And he's still out there making movies. Yep. And there are so many entrepreneurs that launch businesses in their 60s and 70s and 80s. So I think that we need to put a myth. So often I'll be in a room with a lot of younger people, and I just sense that everybody in that room senses, okay, I'm going to defer to the young guy in the room because he's going to be the coolest. He's going to be the hippest. He's going to have the best ideas. And it's just not true. It's not true. I want to listen to everybody. If young people have the best ideas, great. But very often when you couple those ideas with experience of an older person, particularly a person who's been creative their whole career, I'll tell you, they're going to have some fantastic ideas. Lee Clow, who's the legendary art director that worked with Steve Jobs for 30 years and created all those memorable Mac campaigns. He's a legend in the advertising business. He just recently retired in his late 70s. I'm not convinced he's fully retired, but he just decided to take time off. He certainly deserves it. And he certainly was had really become wealthy over his amazing creativity. But he decided to retire. But he was cranking out amazing stuff into his late 70s. So just keep in mind that age does not mean you should step back or defer to younger voices in the room. Stay confident. And now that also means, let me say, Carl, you have to keep learning. You have to keep growing, reading, studying. What comes in goes out. So you have to be thinking about growing even at that age. I remember at the height of his powers, Michelangelo, who could be considered the greatest artist of all time, said, "I'm still learning." And we just have to have that attitude our entire life.
And I think it's important for both age groups to be open, or all age groups to be open to each other. Man in the 70s, not listening to that. Or young whippersnapper, not listening to that. If those can come together, I've been extremely surprised of folks that we've hired on our team that are older, and I probably shouldn't be, but surprised that, like, what, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. And enormous creativity and enormous ideas, and vice versa. And so, I don't think we should. And I think that happens in church world a lot. Talk about music, worship war, whatever the topic might be. I think we can be quick to shoot each other
and that
down.
includes, Carl, that includes diversity of all kinds. I've been in meetings, leadership meetings at churches. The leadership team at this church was 10 middle-aged white guys. I've been at other leadership teams where it was 10 middle-aged black guys, and not a woman in the room, not a minority or another race in the room. And the age group was very similar. I say, let's talk about age. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about experience. Let's talk about all kinds of backgrounds. If we're really going to come up with the brilliant ideas that we need today in this digital world we live in, we need to hear from a lot of voices. And so if you're listening and you have a team that's pretty homogenous, if it's all the same looking people in the room, let's start breaking that up. Let's start getting new voices to the table so that you can start developing some really different perspectives.
Take that into culture for me. How does that affect a culture, and why is culture more important than vision?
Oh, that's really important. I've worked with a lot of visionary leaders over the years that had amazing vision, but the culture of their organization was just so oppressive. I mean, that people would criticize each other behind their back. People were always trying to undercut each other. It was just a nasty. I mean, literally, you could feel the oppression when you walked on the church campus. It was really amazing. Mm-hmm. And then I've been in other places where the leader, the pastor, leader, the executive, nonprofit leader, whatever, didn't have a particularly compelling vision. However, he had this team that was absolutely amazing, and they were flourishing. They were creative. They honored each other. They protected each other. They tried to encourage each other. Let me tell you, better ideas will happen in that kind of environment than will happen with this visionary guy with a negative culture. Culture really does matter. It's the culmination of the attitudes of the people on your team. It's the chemistry of how they work together. And it's not, culture isn't just, the open office space or having beanbag chairs in your office or trying to be hip and cool. Culture is really the chemistry of how your team works together, and the ethos, kind of the philosophy of how they work together. And to find that at churches is actually pretty rare. And it's, it's not hard to believe. Most seminaries or Bible colleges don't train pastors and leaders on how to create a creative culture. As you know, Carl, they don't teach them how to communicate well, particularly with digital media. So it's understandable. Right. However, I would love, if people are listening to this in a church environment, I would love for you to focus on how you create a vibrant, compelling culture that makes people want to be a part of your team. I don't want to rant about this, but I encounter churches all the time that constantly tell me, Phil, we can't get volunteers to work with us. We can't find new hires to come on the team. And it's largely because it's a miserable place to work. Nobody wants to work in this terrible, terrible environment. So if we could fix that, that changes everything.
So I was on a church staff of a really mega church in South Carolina, New Spring Church, and I was at a campus, and it was interesting because I was pretty new, and I went to the worship leader and said, "Hey, do you guys want to come have breakfast with us, or can we with the band, production and band members, right?" And his first response was, "No, we'll stay in the green room and have breakfast with our band." Okay. All right. I kind of want to merge these cultures together, especially, but that's fine. Okay. So a few months later, we get, we have volunteers, we grow and expand. We have couches and chairs and cool environments and all kinds of stuff. And we do big elaborate breakfasts with the team and whatever. And so fast forward, 3 or 4 months, now that band leader's come with me. Hey, can we have some, like, yeah, come on, but
it takes a while.
Not going to treat you right. Not going to treat you the same way, but the culture rubbed off on others is what I'm saying. And really I think it's very important.
Culture is contagious.
It is. So what are some tips for leading, kind of this as a base? Tell me some tips on leading high achievers without being a jerk too. Steve Jobs, we could argue, I guess, Mark Driscoll, folks so give me a balance there. How do we lead high achievers?
Well, I've certainly been in Hollywood meetings and meetings here in Hollywood at studios where, the studio president or a producer or an executive, was a screamer. I've had producers and studio executives just screaming at me all the time. And, the first thing to understand is the minute you start screaming, that tells everybody in the room you've lost control. That tells them that you've run out of good ideas. So they lose trust in you as a leader. So that's an important thing to remember. I also think that it's very important that when you're leading high achievers, you have to respect that team. You have to respect those guys because they're obviously there for a reason. You brought them on because of work that they do. So being demeaning, being overly critical, let me tell you, the best thing you could probably do if you have a team of high achievers is just get out of the way and let them do their thing. That's so incredibly important. The other thing I think that's important is get them away from low achievers. What'll happen, and this is really true with churches, and I'm sure you've experienced this, very often at church, we confuse loyalty with competence. We think because, Bob here has been a loyal member of the team for the last 12 years, we're going to promote him, even though he's failing, even though he's not very talented, even though he's dropping the ball and causing problems, he's loyal. So we're going to keep promoting him. Let me tell you, everybody on the team knows that, and they know that's a problem, and it creates resentment. So understand the difference between people who are loyal and people who are really amazing at what they do. And very often we have to separate those people. If you want to drive a really strong, driven leader crazy, put him next to a low performer. That'll drive him nuts. So you sometimes have to separate him, even if it means putting him in a different building. Here's the thing. We have this mistaken idea, particularly at church or ministries, that we need to value everybody and treat them the same. Certainly value everybody the same. Everybody's the same in God's eyes. We love everybody the same. However, they do not bring the same thing to the table. And so the way we deal with people, the way we treat them needs to be different. You cannot treat high-performing people in the same way you treat low-performing people, and vice versa. It'll drive them both nuts. I've been in many situations where low-performing people actually threatened to quit because they were working next to really high-driven people that were doing amazing stuff. And by comparison, they were just totally dropping the ball. And vice versa. I've seen high-performing people walk away from a great job because they were forced to work with low performers. So it's not a better, worse. It's not, a thing where you try to treat people visibly different, but understand that what motivates and inspires high motivated, driven people is quite different than what motivates and inspires low performers or low. And the thing is, by the way, you need that low performers on teams are perfectly acceptable. There's plenty of jobs where you don't need a Steve Jobs to handle the position. So value those guys, work with them closely. However, the way you deal with them and the way you deal with high performers needs to be different. That's a really critical thing for a leader to understand.
So speak to one thing I was referring to when I mentioned Steve Jobs or Mark Driscoll, and you mentioned screaming and yelling, but how do I push them to achieve great without being a jerk? You want to speak to that a little bit more?
No, that's great. I think, that's a big issue with leaders today. Somehow we think we have to be overbearing. We think we have to kind of be a jerk to push people. But it's, do you want to push people or you inspire them to come to you? And I'm a really big believer in inspiring people. There's a lot of things you can do. Number one, get them the right tools. Very often in a church situation, we just don't get the computer, the edit system, the design system, the apps and stuff that people need. And we expect them to do amazing work. I would rather have my team have time for amazing creative work than spend that time trying to make these stupid broken machines work. That just doesn't work, or try to make the out-of-date apps work. So get them the tools they need. Another thing is, make sure all the leaders in the organization are on the same page. That's a big thing with me. Very often I'll get an assignment from a client. Maybe it's a pastor, and he'll tell me his vision for a project, what he wants to accomplish. The next day I get a call from his executive pastor who says, well, pastor wasn't exactly right about this project. Let me tell you the truth about it. Then the next day I get a call from the youth director who says, well, let me give you a different approach you should think about with this project. Suddenly I've got 4 different directives from the same leadership team. You need to all get on the same page if you really want to focus your creative team. That's incredibly important. So I'm just a big believer that inspire people, invest in their strengths, and get out of the way if you need to, and let them do their thing. Your job as a leader isn't to manage creative talent. It's not to be overbearing. It's not to tell them what to do. It's to unleash them to do amazing things that they're capable of.
Good. As we close today, bring this back to the Sunday morning experience. There's nothing like Sunday's coming as a deadline.
Yes.
So talk to me about how it relates to church world.
Sunday does come with amazing regularity in the church world. There's no question about that. And I think that a real challenge there, and this is not any different from what I work with television programming, because it's a weekly series thing. You have to be able to learn to keep your creativity maxed out at a real high level of performance week after week after week. And that's a real challenge. It's one thing to be creative. It's another thing to be creative week after week after week. And so you have to constantly be finding the reason and the way to be creative in those kind of ways. Look for that hidden truth, that nugget that you can share with people in a new and different way. What is that visual that you've never tried? What's that short film or that social media campaign you could do? There are some people that work well in that weekly environment for one television program or one church or whatever. Other people need more of a variety, and both are incredibly important skills, but they're really needed in certain situations. So in church, I would just say have a team that loves to work together. Probably the greatest way to stay creative in a weekly church environment is to create an amazing culture. Have a culture that people want to be there every Sunday. Have a culture where people want to work together every Sunday. Have a culture where people do feel the urgency and the commitment to be sharing the gospel every week and feel that is an opportunity. If you could do that and have those kinds of people on the team, and let me say this real quick, Carl, before we go, be brutal about who's on your team. That old Good. Jim Collins thing about getting the right people on the bus, getting them in the right seats in the bus, and getting the wrong people off the bus. Let me tell you, I could not be a stronger advocate of getting the wrong people off the bus. We don't have to hire everybody. We don't have to have everybody on our volunteer team. I say raise the standards. The stakes are high in a church situation. We're trying to reach the world with the gospel. Certainly, we want to be nice. We don't want to kick anybody to the curb. We want to help them get plugged in wherever they're going to excel. But if it's not on your team, it's not in that Sunday morning environment, let's move them on to where they can excel, and we can get the right people that will do amazing things and hopefully change the world.
Good. Can I hit you with some rapid fire before we go?
Sure.
All right, here we go. 5 questions for you. Number 1, favorite movie.
You know what? I might say The Godfather, but I kind of shy away from these kind of comparisons because I love so many movies. I love so many. It's just hard. But I don't know, let's go with The Godfather because I think of what it represented when I was young.
Yeah, I can't choose one either. All right, number 2, what is your biggest thing that pastors and church staff could do right now to execute ideas on a deadline? Give me one quick practical tip for this week.
A good practical tip for this weekend is get out of the office. Get out of the office. I often say go to where the problem is. Stop having your meetings in the conference room. If the parking lot is the problem, have the meeting in the parking lot. If the youth department is the problem, have the meeting there. Go for a walk. Get out. Start stretching your brain a little bit. People are sick of walking into donuts in the conference room. Maybe it's time to shake things up because more and more research indicates the environment you're in has a huge amount to do with your creativity.
What is the biggest thing in the church right now that you want to see change for the better? What should the church be paying more attention to?
I would say communicating your message in today's digital age. People think differently. They absorb information differently. They consume information differently. And so sharing the gospel 5, 10, 15 years ago, it's not going to work today. The way we did it in that sense, everything changes. And this digital generation, I'll tell you, the revolution is bigger than we think it is. We thought the print revolution was big. The digital revolution is bigger. And I think pastors need to have a better understanding of what your website can really do, what your social media is capable of doing, short videos, things like that. That will have a huge impact on your creative team.
What profession other than your own would you be doing if you weren't not doing what you're doing?
You know what? I would. That's a great question. I might be a psychiatrist. I love dealing with people's behavior. It absolutely fascinates me. What motivates people? Maybe it's because I grew up in the South around a lot of crazy people, but motivates people to do stuff just fascinates me. And so who knows? I might have been a psychiatrist.
Good. Last question. Why is it important? Give me your why. Why is it important that I deliver ideas on a deadline?
It's important because you're working for somebody, or you're working for a cause or a project. And you need to deliver on that, because so many other things are impinging on that. Like an illustration I said before with a Super Bowl commercial. I may just be making the Super Bowl commercial, but there is a print campaign going along with it. There's a social media campaign going along with it. There's PR and press releases and all kind of other activities. There's live events going on with it. And so our cog is just one part of the bigger machine. And so if we screw up that cog, we've screwed up a lot. And whether it's in a church situation or a ministry situation, if every time we don't deliver, we mess things up for a whole lot of people. And that ultimately gets to where it messes up the message itself. And for me, the message itself is the most important thing we could possibly do. And that's where our focus really needs to be, and why we need to deliver.
Good. Tell me how we can get the book and follow you.
PhilCooke.com is my website. A little shameless self-promotion. PhilCooke.com is my website. And you can get the book at ideasonadeadline.com, or you can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever favorite bookstore you happen to have and order it. It's available everywhere. And so I'd love for you to get it and buy copies for your team, because Lord knows every member of our team needs to raise the bar when it comes to creativity.
Good. Phil, pleasure as always, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great questions, man.
Hey guys, I want to tell you about a book that I've put together called The Ultimate Production Team Handbook. This handbook is the definitive companion resource for the volunteer media team at your church. It comes packed with documents and training materials that will give you a massive jump start in creating your own manual for your media production team. It includes organizational charts, volunteer job descriptions, training guides, checklists, team lists, scheduling templates, and more. You can take the material and easily adapt it to your team. We even give you permission to edit and produce as many copies of the documents that you may need at your church. I've given you everything that you need to build your own volunteer handbook for your team. And I want you to pick up a copy today at 1230.media/books. That's 1230.media/books.
The show notes for this episode are available now at makingsundayhappen.com.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the show this week. Next week, I'm talking with worship leader, music artist, pastor, church planner, Joel Engel. Joel has had a very unique career. He's accepted a brand new position at the AM Agency, which is a group that helps pastors and Christian businesses grow. And I'm going to be talking with Joel about how to take Christian business practices and implement them into the church to help you reach your community. I hope you'll join us next week for that. We'll go out there and create some incredible worship experiences at your church this weekend. I'll catch you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.